Welcome back to The Explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today, we are popping the hood on the hidden economic machinery that essentially powers the most dominant companies on the planet. We're going to uncover exactly how the business world totally flipped on its head over the last couple of decades, shifting away from these traditional linear models to an entirely new, deeply connected paradigm. So if you've ever wondered why today's tech giants operate so fundamentally differently from the industry titans of the past, well, you are definitely in the right place.
It really is a complete tectonic shift in global economic dominance. Just think back to 2008. The top 10 companies by market cap were basically heavy industrial titans, right? We're talking PetroChina, Exxon, General Electric. These are your classic pipeline businesses. They extracted or produced a physical good, and then they literally pushed it down a pipeline to a consumer. Now contrast that with 2024. Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Alphabet, Amazon. The heavy industry pipelines have been entirely replaced. It's like looking at two completely different planets.
But here's a really crazy detail tucked away in that 2008 data. Back then, there was literally only one company in the top 10 that operated on a network business model rather than a pipeline, and that was AT&T, just barely hanging on at number 10. They didn't sell discrete physical products, they provided the infrastructure for people to interact. Fast forward to today, the top 5 companies are entirely driven by network economics. It's been a total global takeover.
So how exactly did this happen? Let's get right into Section 1, Decoding the Network, and look at how platforms rule.
To really unpack this, we're relying on some phenomenal foundational work by Henrika Schneider. His textbook, The Economics of Networks and Digital Platforms, is our source material for this explainer. It brilliantly demystifies what he calls the economic machine room of these business models, bridging the gap between high-level economic theory and day-to-day managerial practice. It shows us exactly why these platforms are winning.
Okay, let's get our core definitions straight before we go further. A network or a platform, and honestly I'll be using those two terms interchangeably today, is economically defined as the reciprocal interaction of different people who transact using a common infrastructure. Think about that for a second. The core business isn't about making a product to sell to a user. It's about providing the space, the interaction structure, where users can connect and transact with each other.
And just to add a quick layer of nuance here, you hear the word ecosystem thrown around all the time in tech. Economically speaking, an ecosystem is simply a controlled link between several of these interaction structures. You can think of it essentially as a network of networks, or a platform for platforms. It is the absolute highest, most complex level of this business model.
Now here is a massive curveball for you. While we instinctively associate networks with modern Silicon Valley tech giants, the actual economic model is ancient. I mean, look at these examples, from the massive Al Medina Souk in Aleppo and the Kapalı Çarşı in Istanbul, to weekly farmers markets, historical trade fairs, and early telephone services. These are all traditional networks. Every single one relies on a sponsor managing a common infrastructure so that regular people can interact and trade. Of course, these things don't just run on autopilot, right? Whether it's a physical bazaar or a slick software app, the sponsor has to actively manage it to turn potential connections into real, valuable interactions. Schneider breaks this governance down into the 4 C's. First, creation, setting up the actual infrastructure itself. Second, curation, enforcing the rules to maintain trust between users. Third, customization, engineering specific benefits for the network. And fourth, consumption, actively steering those users to interact. If you can master these 4 C's, you control the network.
Which brings us to a really compelling mystery. If networks have existed since ancient, literal medieval bazaars, why are they only eating the global economy right now? Why wasn't a traditional network business the biggest company in the world 50 years ago?
To solve that, we head into Section 2, Transaction Costs, the core secret.
There's this hilarious yet brilliant anecdote from the source material. The American economist Michael Munger was in his oral doctoral exam, proudly drawing up this highly complex, mind-bending mathematical model on the chalkboard. His mentor, the future Nobel laureate Douglas North, literally interrupted him before he could even finish his second derivation and just stated simply, almost like he was talking to a child, "Mike, it's the transaction costs." And ultimately, it all boils down to that.
So what are they, really? Transaction costs are all the costs incurred in transferring goods from one person to another, rather than the costs of actually producing those goods. We're not just talking about money here. It's the time, the risk, the effort, and all the headache you experience before a transaction even happens. High transaction costs are exactly what prevent people from doing business in the first place. Let's make this super concrete. Think about the friction in daily business. Initiation costs, literally just figuring out how to make contact with a buyer or seller. Information procurement, doing the digging to see if a partner is actually reliable. Agreement costs, haggling over contracts. Then you've got handling, adjustments, and monitoring everything for compliance. Every single one of these steps is pure friction. It is just sand in the gears of commerce. And this perfectly illustrates why traditional networks even exist. They are designed to lower that exact friction. Schneider uses a great example of a German company trying to expand into Mexico. If they go it entirely alone, they face massive initiation and information costs. They don't know the language, the business culture, who to trust, nothing. But if they join the German-Mexican Chamber of Commerce, which is a traditional network, they suddenly have this pre-vetted pool of partners. The chamber lowers their screening costs in exchange for a membership fee. The network solves the transaction cost problem.
But here's where it gets incredibly exciting for us today. Welcome to Section 3, Digital versus Traditional, the Ultimate Shift.
Because sure, traditional networks lower transaction costs, but the digital revolution takes that reduction and puts it on absolute steroids. Think about selling a used hairdryer. Back in the day, the physical transaction costs were just awful. You had to physically walk to multiple secondhand shops, haggle with owners, waste hours of your weekend. Honestly, most people would just throw it away because the hassle swallowed the actual value of the appliance. Then eBay came along. Suddenly, those transaction costs plummeted to a 3-minute profile creation and snapping a photo on your phone. Digital networks absolutely obliterate physical friction.
You see the exact same dynamic in advertising. Compare a traditional print newspaper to a digital ad. A print network has a limited circulation and really high what economists call dispersion loss, meaning your ad hits a ton of people who just couldn't care less about your product. Digital platforms, though, they use personalized targeting to ensure your ad reaches the precise, exact audience you want, vastly increasing your reach while completely removing the transaction cost of that dispersion loss.
And honestly, this is exactly why big, traditional physical B2B trade fairs are shrinking today. Their transaction costs, buying physical floor space, building booths, paying for flights and hotels for your team, they're just way too high when compared to digital B2B platforms, where the physical setup costs are basically zero. The digital alternative simply starves the traditional network of its value by being vastly, vastly more efficient.
So, the big takeaway from our explainer today is what we can call the digital advantage. Digital platforms like Uber, Airbnb, or Alibaba, they aren't just winning because they have sleek apps or happen to be tech-savvy. No, they are dominating because they ruthlessly and systematically eliminate transaction costs compared to traditional pipeline models. They literally make it easier, faster, and cheaper for two sides to connect than ever before in human history.
Which leaves me with a final, somewhat provocative question for you to ponder. Look around at your own professional world. What high transaction costs in your industry are just sitting there, waiting to be eliminated by the next big digital platform? Because believe me, wherever friction exists, a network is waiting to disrupt it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking for those hidden economic gears turning all around you.